also open up for questions later, but before I hand it over to Hana, just a few words about our presenter today. So Hana Bendcowsky is the program director of the Jerusalem Center for Jewish-Christian Relations. She holds an MA degree in Comparative Religions from Hebrew University and has 20 years of practical experience in interfaith activities in Israel and abroad. She teaches in varied institutions, colleges, academic programs, and Christian seminaries, including the IDF, governmental offices and institutions. Governmental offices and institutions. She also works as a tutor educator in Jerusalem. Her expertise is the Christian communities in Israel and Jewish-Christian relations in the Israeli context. She will be one of our guides on our Israel 2021 adventure, leading us on a tour of Christian Jerusalem. So with that, I hand it over to Hana Bendcowsky.
Okay, so good afternoon, good morning. I'm here in Jerusalem. It's already mid of the night, and I'm very, very happy to be with you today and to share with you some of my work and thoughts and activities. What we're going to do, I'm going to share a presentation. So while I'm talking, feel free to send questions by chat, and then at the end, I will take down my presentation. I'll be able to see you, and then we'll be able to have a little conversation. I will start by introducing myself and my work. I'm working for the Jerusalem Center for Jewish-Christian Relations, which is an organization that was established 16 years ago, in order to promote dialogue between Christian and Jews in the special context of the Holy Land. And I will explain why there is a special context in the Holy Land during my presentation. Since the founder of the organization passed away, we changed the name of the organization and we expanded it. So today we don't only deal with Jewish-Christian relations, but we do a lot of other interfaith activities. And the organization is called now the Rossing Center for Education and Dialogue. I will share the screen with the presentation so you'll be able to see the names. Yeah, so here it is. Just a second. Yeah, so now it's the Rossing Center for Education and Dialogue, and I'm responsible now for the Jerusalem Center for Jewish-Christian Relations, which is a part of the Rossing Center. You can check our website, you can follow our Facebook pages for the Rossing Center for JCR, and toward the end of the program, I will also tell a little bit about what we're doing. I will open the chat so I'll be able to see your questions. No, I cannot open that. Just a second. Okay. No, I'll just stop the sharing for a second. Oh, now it's working. Sorry for that. Sometimes I will share again. Excuse me. Okay. So it still doesn't appear. So I will start and I hope it will work later on the chat. Otherwise, I'll just stop in the middle to see your questions. So when we talk about old problems, new challenges, I will try to explain why the situation in Israel is different than other places. I mean, I'm sure many of you are involved in interfaith activity, have heard about interfaith activity, but I would like to emphasize on the special challenges of interfaith activity in the Holy Land, in Israel, and why is it so different. So I will start by giving the background of Jewish-Christian relations in the Israeli context. Then I will talk about the challenges, and I will try to share with you our analysis and the way we identify the special challenges of Jewish-Christian relations in Israel. Then toward the end, I will talk about achievements and what next. So maybe we'll start by asking, who are the partners? Who are the Christians here and who are the Jews? And in what way is it different from other places? So we'll start with the Jews. Who are the Jews in Israel? What in relation to Christian and Christianity? So let's start by just saying that 75% of Jewish population in Israel were born in Israel. That means that they grew up in a very Jewish environment. Now, I grew up in a city called Kfar Saba. It was at least 100% Jewish. I never met someone who's not Jewish until I went to the army or went to travel abroad. If you don't have experience in living in multicultural society, multi-religious society, you don't really interact or know anything about people from other religions. So when we talk about Jewish-Christian relations and what Jews think about Christians, their experience is very much based on what they've learned in school or what they've heard or what they saw in movies. So a lot of Israelis know a lot about Christmas, about Santa Claus, but that's about it, because you don't have experience of living together with people from other religions. In the survey we did in 2009, and I assume that there are not so many changes since we did the survey, 52% of the adult Jewish population indicated that they have no Christian friends. So they maybe know Christians that they work with from other countries, but they don't know them as Christian. They never talk with them about religion. It never occurred to them that they're actually Christians. 23% of the adult Jewish population is greatly or significantly bothered when they meet a Christian in the street who's wearing a cross. Now, this is a small number, 23%, but just think about it. I mean, how many people wearing a cross do you see when you walk in the street? It's kind of obvious. You wouldn't be bothered by that. But here in Israel, a little less than 1/4 of the Jewish population feel uncomfortable about it. We'll try to explain why it's such an issue. Interestingly, 58% of the adult Jewish population believes that there has been a change for better in the attitude of the Catholic Church toward Judaism and Jews in the past 50 years. Not that they know of any particular document that was published by the Catholic Church. They don't know about Untitled Chapter, a very important document that the Catholic Church published and changed their attitude toward Jews, but they do feel a change in the attitude of the Church toward Judaism, and I think it's very much connected to the activity of the late Pope John Paul II, who visited Israel and was accepted very warmly here and built very good relationship with Jews and with Israel. And a little less, but quite similar percentage of the adult Jewish population said that they think that there also changed for better in the attitude of Protestant churches toward Judaism and Jews. So again, people feel that there's a change in the attitude, but still it's a little more than half of the population. So that means that people don't really have experience of meeting Christian, living with Christians, and their opinion is mainly shaped by, as I said, their experience from traveling, the experience from watching American television, which is very, very Christian, and from what we learn from in schools. And what we learn in schools is usually the highlights of the Jewish history. And the highlights of Jewish history is usually persecution, expulsion, and of course the Shoah. So most of the Israeli Jews don't know many Christians, didn't live with Christians, and their opinion about Christianity is very much shaped by the history and by the painful history of Jewish-Christian relations. What about the Christians here? So who are the Christians in the Holy Land? Again, it's very different from what you will find in the US. So let's start by saying that 75% of the Israelis are Jews. Now, I guess you know, and if you don't, I will inform you about it. Now that in Israel, there is no separation of state and religion, and therefore your religion is registered by the state. So when a child is born or when someone immigrates to Israel, his nationality and religion are registered by the state. As a Jew, your nationality is Jewish and your religion is Jewish. It has nothing to do with the citizenship. I'm only talking about people who have Israeli citizenship. This is another kind of registration. And then if you're an Arab Muslim, your nationality would be Arab, your religion would be Islam. If you're a Druze, nationality, Druze, religion. If you are Christian and you're an Arab Christian, like 80% of the Christians in Israel, your nationality would be Arab, your religion would be Christianity. Now, it's relevant mainly for marriage, divorce, and burial, because in Israel we don't have civil marriage. So if you want to get married, it has to be done through the religious authorities. So if a Christian couple wants to get married, they have to do it in the church. Even if they're not religious and they don't believe in Christ and they don't care about the church, they have to do it in the church, unless they do it in another country, and then it will be recognized in Israel. So We have in Israel officially 175,000 Christians. 80% of them are Arab Christians, and I will explain what it means in a second. And 20% are non-Arab speaking Christians. I will start with the non-Arab Christians. They're usually people who got married with Israelis, who for different reasons managed to get citizenship here, righteous among the nations, who saved Jews during the Holocaust and their families. They can also immigrate to Israel and get citizenship. So there are special cases for people to come here and get citizenship. If you're just a Christian and you feel like immigrating to Israel because you love the country and you come here and you live here for 20 years, it doesn't mean that you will get citizenship. But if you're married to a Jew or you have special circumstances, you might going to get citizenship. Of course, I'm not counting with the Christian people who converted to Judaism. They will get citizenship because they're Jews. But I'm talking about people who are registered as Christians. Now, I want to say something about the Arab Christians. What does it mean to be an Arab Christian? And this is very important to the question of Jewish-Christian relations here. If we said that 80% of the Christians in Israel are Arab Christians, what does it mean? Are there Muslims who converted to Christianity? Not at all. When we talk about Arab Christians, we're talking about Christians that their mother tongue is Arabic and that they pray in Arabic. Some of them pray for centuries in Arabic, others, Catholic, for example, until 1965 prayed in Latin, but since 1965 they pray in Arabic, they speak in Arabic, they live the Arab culture, they eat Arab food, they share the Arab values and traditions. Now, since when do we have this situation? We have this kind of Arab Christian communities around the Middle East. So some would say since very early times. The quote on the left is a quote from the book of Acts, from the New Testament. When the disciples received the Holy Spirit 50 days after the resurrection, they start to speak in tongues. And there are different people sitting there and looking at the disciple, now apostles, and think, how can they speak all these languages? Peter would explain, because we received the Holy Spirit. But they were wondering, how can they speak all these languages? And then they have a list of languages that people who were attending that event spoke these languages and recognized the disciples speaking in the same language. And one of the languages that are mentioned here is Arabic. So there were people who are Arabs, and they were present in Jerusalem in year 33, and they were among this group of people who received the Holy Spirit according to the book of Acts. So we're talking about Christians who are Arabs already in the first century. But most of the Arab Christians, or the phenomena of Arab Christianity, started in the 7th century. In the 7th century, and look at the map to the right, when tribes of Arabs started to occupy the Middle East and North Africa in the 7th century, they took over all the Middle East and North Africa. They went all the way to Spain in 711, and they brought with them religion, culture, and language. They forced a common language for the whole huge empire they created, and the language was Arabic. So everyone in the Middle East and North Africa and Spain spoke Arabic. Everyone adopted some of the Arab cultures that these tribes brought with them, but not everyone converted to Islam. Actually, they didn't force conversion. So there were a lot of Christians and Jews in the Middle East who started to speak Arabic in the 7th century, adopted some of the Arab culture, but they did not convert to Islam. So we have Arab Jews and Arab Christians. Arab Jews are Jews who speak Arabic and grew up here in the Middle East, and Christians are Christians who speak Arabic and they're part of the Arab culture. So when we talk about Arab Christians in Israel, we talk about Christians who were here since the beginning of Christianity and started to speak Arabic in the last 1300 years. And they are the majority of the Christians here in Israel. So when we think about local Christians, when we think about what language do people talk when they come out of church in Israel, it would be Arabic. So majority of the Christians here speak Arabic. But, and there's always the but, these are not the only Christians in the Holy Land, in Israel. We have what I call new Christians in Israel. They're not registered as Christians, or they're not registered at all, but they live in Israel and they're part of the Israeli society. we're talking about something between 30,000 to 150,000 immigrants from the former Soviet Union countries who came to Israel, and they're not Jewish, but Christian. Now I'm going back to the numbers. We talked about 75% of the Israelis that are Jews, 17% of the Israelis are Muslims, and I'm talking about Israeli Muslims, Muslims who live in Israel and have Israeli citizenship. We mentioned the 2% Christians, 175. I said that they're also Druze, about the same number. But we also have in Israel 4% of the population, about 380,000 people, who have no religious affiliation. So when they documented their religion, when they immigrated to Israel, they said that they have no religion. They came from Russia. In Russia, they were considered Jews because they had a Jewish father, a Jewish grandfather. When they immigrated to Israel, they could not be registered as Jews because in Israel, you would be registered as Jew only if your mother is Jewish, according to the Orthodox Halacha. So they were registered with no religion. So 380,000 people in Israel have no religious affiliation. They're registered with no religion. But many of them came from Russia and they didn't have religion. I mean, they came because their father was Jewish and it was an opportunity to get out of the former Soviet Union. And they came here and they searched for faith and they found God in the church. So they did not change their registration. They still registered with no religion, but according to their faith, they're Christians. And they're totally integrated into the Jewish Hebrew-speaking society. The Arab Christians, they have their schools, they live in Arab cities, they go to, their commercial centers, they live their life in their Arab villages. But when we talk about these immigrants who came in the last 20 years, 30 years already, from the former Soviet Union countries, we're talking about people who are totally integrated into the Israeli Jewish Hebrew-speaking society. And they believe in Jesus. So they're Christians registered with no religion, integrated into the Jewish Israeli society. I sometimes refer to them as Israeli Christian Russian Jews. They're Israelis by citizenship, living in Israel. They're Russians by background. They're Christian by faith, but culturally, they're Jews because they celebrate Jewish holidays. Now, this is a new phenomenon for Israel. We never had something like that before. We also have 70,000 to 80,000 migrant workers who live in Israel, work in Israel, but they're not registered as citizens because they're migrant workers. But they're integrated into the Israeli society because they work with Israelis and they work with Israeli families. So, for example, the Filipino community, they take care of elderly people. They live with them in their houses. And on Saturdays, they get together to pray in the church. Why on Saturday? Because that's the day they get a day off. So they get together and they celebrate together. And they also have kids because they come here to meet a partner. They have a child and they send the kids. These are the kids of the Filipino community. They send the kids to the school. Now in Israel, you get free education. It doesn't matter what's the status of your parents. As a child, you deserve to have free education and you have the right to get free education. So they go to public Hebrew-speaking school. So what kind of education do they get in public Hebrew-speaking school? Jewish education. You get Jewish history, you get Jewish religion, you get Jewish tradition. So they want to teach them. The mothers want to take them to church, to teach them their own faith. The mothers take them to church on Saturday because on Sunday they have school. But the kids don't speak the language of their mothers. Their mothers, the Filipino mothers, speak Tagalog, while the kids go to Hebrew school, so their first language is Hebrew. So the Catholic Church here has to have catechism to teach the kids about their own faith in Hebrew. They even produce these booklets to teach children about the Catholic faith. Now, we never had anything like that because Hebrew is the language that's used by Jews. Christians in Israel usually speak Arabic. Now we have the first time in the history booklets in Hebrew to teach Catholic kids in Hebrew their own faith. And on Jewish holidays, they have camps because their mothers work and the children don't have schools during the Jewish holidays. So during the Jewish holidays, they arrange camps for them, for these kids to learn about their own faith, because they cannot have this holidays camp during the Christian holidays because during Christmas and Easter, they have school. So, and then we have asylum seekers. asylum seekers from Ethiopia, from Eritrea, asylum seekers from Africa who also live in Israel. And again, I'll go back to the numbers. We're talking about 40,000 asylum seekers, mostly from Eritrea, but also from other African countries who live in Israel with no status, but they're also Christian and they're also integrated into the Israeli Hebrew-speaking society. They work with Israeli, they live with Israeli, they pray in churches that they created in the first Hebrew city in Israel, in Tel Aviv. The largest Christian community in Israel today is not in Nazareth and not in Jerusalem, but in Tel Aviv, because of these migrant workers and asylum seekers. So when we think about Christians in Israel today, it's mainly the Arab Christians, but we also talk about other new Christians in Israel that are integrated into the Israeli Jewish Hebrew-speaking society and bring new challenges to the Jewish society. So we have to remember that when we talk about Jewish-Christian relations. So that's the background for who are the Christian and who are the Jews. Now we will talk about, one last example, the complexity. There is a Hebrew-speaking Catholic community in Israel. This community was established in the 1950s by Christians who came from other countries who felt compelled to be here and to help Jews and support the Jews after the Holocaust. And they wanted to pray in Hebrew because that's the language of the Jews, but also because Jesus was speaking Hebrew. So they established a Hebrew-speaking Catholic community. They got a special permission from the Pope to pray in Hebrew and not in Latin, like all the Catholics until 1965, and then translated all the prayers into Hebrew. But the old generation were usually monks and sisters and brothers who came to live in the Holy Land in Israel. But today, this community actually hosts this young generation of Filipino kids, or kids from mixed families, kids from families of righteous among the nations, people who saved Jews during the Holocaust and immigrated to Israel. So they all go through this, attend this community where they pray in Hebrew and they celebrate Mass in Hebrew. Now in 2016, there was the International Catholic Youth Day in Poland. And this community sent a delegation to the Youth Day, where millions of young people get together to celebrate Mass with the Pope. And the delegation, as you can see over here, includes this young woman has a grandfather who was saved by her grandmother during the Holocaust. So they immigrated to Israel. And you see Filipino kids and Eritrean kids. So these are Israeli Christian kids from all over the world who live in Israel, who grew up in Israel, speak Hebrew. And when they went to attend this youth day, everyone comes with their own flag. So they came with the Israeli flag. And when they were seated in this huge open air crowded mass with all these delegations from all over the world, they organized them according to their regions. So the Portuguese were sitting next to the Spanish young people, and the Brazilian next to the Argentinian. And this delegation from Israel were located next to the Lebanese group, Syrian group, Palestinian group, Iraqi group, and so on. So that was quite a strange situation because they raised the Israeli flag. They said, we're from Israel, we're Israeli Catholics, but they found themselves in a very complicated and sensitive situation, surrounded by Christians from other countries, enemy countries. So again, to draw attention to the sensitivities and the challenges of being a Christian and the Christian communities here in the Holy Land. But now we can go to the official challenges, the challenges of Jewish-Christian relations in Israel. Now, in Jewish-Christian dialogue that started mainly after the Holocaust, after the Second World War around the world, it was mainly a dialogue of intellectuals, of academics, of religious leaders who got together to talk about, from one hand, the Jewish roots of Christianity. For the Christians, it was kind of a way to rediscover the roots of Christianity. And for the Jews, in many cases, it was a way to get attention of the majority, of the Christian majority, and to present themselves to make sure that there would be more secured in the future, that another Holocaust, another Shoah would not happen. So there was a lot about being a small Jewish minority now having more interest in their tradition and culture from the Christian side, and trying to find a way to bridge the gaps of 2,000 years of very painful history in order to be able to be together, to live together. Here's a different situation. Here, for the first time in the history, we are the majority and the Christians the minority. Now, we are expert in being minority. We know how to be minority. We as Jews, we've been minority for 2,000 years. We know how to protect ourselves. We know how to protect the community. We have done that. It's quite a different challenge to be a majority. You have other responsibilities. But when we look at the Christians here, especially the Arab Christians, we don't see them as a minority. We perceived ourselves as minority. We still feel a small minority in the Middle East. We still feel a small minority in the Christian world. And the Christians here, the Christians, this 140,000 Christians in Israel, they're part of a greater majority. They're Arabs, so they're part of the Arab world, and they're Christians, they're part of the Christian world. So we're the minority and they're the majority. And the Christians here, they perceive themselves as a tiny minority. They say we're a minority within a minority. We're a minority of Christians in the Muslim world, and we're a minority of Arabs in a Jewish state. Now, when you have a dialogue, when you bring two groups together and they want to bridge the gaps between them and to build positive relationship, usually you have one side which is stronger and more dominant and more privileged than the other. And the minority usually expect the majority, the more privileged side, the more stronger side, to listen to them, to take care of them, to protect their rights. As a minority, you want the majority to pay attention to you, to hear your pain, to hear about your suffering, and to take care of you and to take care about your rights. But when you have a competition over who is the minority, no one is ready to listen. So if we as Jews said, well, we're the minority, so you Christian have to listen to us, you have to take care of us, you have to pay attention to our needs, you have to hear about our suffering and our pain and the Holocaust, and the Christian at the same time say, no, we're the minority, you should listen to us, you are strong Israel, you have a state, you have the army, you have to take care of us. You cannot build a bridge. Both sides feel that they are the victims and they compete on who is more playing the victim role than the other, and it's impossible to bridge it. It's impossible to bring them together, to listen to each other. And this is the first challenge. Who is the minority and who is the majority? What could be so easy if you bring American Jews and Christian Jews, community, to talk together, it's obvious that the Jews are the minority and Christian the majority. If you bring German Jews and German Christians to sit together, it's obvious who is the minority, who is the majority. In Israel, it's not clear. Then we have past relations. And past relation overshadow everything we do when we talk about Jewish-Christian relations. When I talk with my students, and I teach in different colleges and different adult programs, when I ask, what do you have in mind when I say Christianity? What's the first association that comes to your mind? They would say Holocaust, persecution, crusaders. They would feel uncomfortable with the symbol of the cross, not because it's a symbol of someone's faith, but because it symbolizes a very painful history that has its roots already in the New Testament in very, very early text. The tension between Christian and Jews is something that's already reflected in the text of the New Testament and in a very early rabbinical text. This tension of two traditions that's separated in a very painful process can be traced back to the beginning of Christianity. And anti-Semitism and hatred developed along the years. So if you don't know a Christian, and the only thing you know, as I said in the beginning, is coming from textbook, from history book, and you don't get the whole history, you only get the highlights of Jewish history, and the highlights of Jewish history is persecution, expulsion, and so on. The history and the painful history, as I said, overshadow these relationships. And that makes it very, very difficult, because when a Jew come to meet with a Christian and said, well, you Christian, you're very cruel to us. How could you do this and that if the Bible said something else? The Christians here, the Arab Christians in Israel, who lived here all their life and have nothing to do with what happened to Jews in Europe, do not understand why they have to hear about the Jewish past. They don't find it relevant to Jewish-Christian relations in Israel. In general, Palestinians don't understand why we keep mentioning the Holocaust to the Shoah all the time. It's not relevant. It's your problem with the European. We have nothing to do with that. Don't bring that as an excuse for anything that's happening here in Israel. And it's very difficult, because when a Jew sees a Christian, it's immediately connected to this painful history. We brought with us a very heavy baggage with difficult relationships. And the Christians here are not aware of that, and they don't want to be aware of that. And they really get insulted when we mention that. And I'll give you a couple of examples for that. So there was a delegation of young Israeli students who went to visit Germany. And it was obvious for the organizer in Germany that whenever they went into a room and there was a cross in that room, the German who hosted the delegation, she just put the cross in a drawer. And she said, well, Jesus would rest here until the group would leave. But when we had a similar case of Christian women who got together with a group of Jewish women, and they wanted to have a tour together in Jerusalem, and they wanted to visit a synagogue, and one of the conditions to enter the synagogue from the synagogue was that the Christian women would put the cross under their shirt. The local Christian women, the Arab Christian, were very much insulted. Unlike the German woman who understood that for Jews, the cross symbolizes a very painful history, for the Arab Christian, it was very insulting that they were asked to hide their identity. They could not see that as an act of respect to the synagogue, because they could not understand why a symbol of their faith is insulting for a Jew and would not allow them to enter a synagogue, prevent them from entering a synagogue. That's not because they don't want to respect the Jews. They said, we keep respecting the Jewish people all the time. Whenever they came to visit us, we bring kosher food, we take care of their needs, but we don't want to hide our faith. We don't want to put the cross under the shirt. We want you to respect our faith, and we want to enter with the cross to the synagogue. So it's not that they didn't want to respect the Jews, but they could not understand why the cross is such a sensitive symbol for Jews. And that's because they are local Arab Christians, and they don't know and they don't understand the history and the baggage, the pain that we brought with us from Europe. So that's another problem for the dialogue. Another issue is the theological questions from both sides that make it much more difficult for Christians and Jews to build bridges. We don't have a theological problem with Islam. Most of the rabbi would not consider Islam idolatry, would not say it's not allowed to enter a mosque, would allow Jews even to pray inside a mosque, to have relationship with Muslims. It was never a problem. It's always a problem with Christianity. And unfortunately, many rabbis who wanted to keep the Jews and the Christian communities away from each other, and priests did the same thing, made all kind of statement that made this border between the Christian and the Jewish community very, very clear through the halakha. So Jews are not supposed to enter churches, Jews are not supposed to sit with Christians, Jews are not supposed to drink wine, because maybe it was used for liturgical use in the church. So they're all kind of halachic law issues that kind of separate Jews from Christians. Jews have a problem with Trinity. Jews have a problem with the use of images in the church. Jews have a problem with the way Christians talk about God. And again, to give you some very concrete examples from the survey. So here in the survey, we distinguish between secular and religious Jews, and we examined if there are differences in the answers that they gave. So in the 2009 survey, 66% of the secular Jews disagreed with the statement that Christianity is a religion of idolatry. So that means that the others agreed. 78% of religious people agree that Christianity is a religion of idolatry. Now, in Judaism, idolatry is a really, really hard definition. I know it's really bad to say something about something that's idolatry. That's something that they would not say about Islam, because the way they talk about God is more similar to Judaism than in Trinity. So it's a very difficult thing to say. I would say it's a lack of understanding of how Christians talk about God, but that's the image people have about Christianity. 52% of young people agree that Christianity is a religion of idolatry. So that means that as more religion you are and younger you have more negative opinion about Christianity. So you would think that young people are more liberal and more open about other religions. But according to this survey, younger people who have less experience or less exposure to Christianity because they were born in Israel and never met Christians and never learned anything about Christianity, their opinion were more negative. What about teaching Christianity? So 54% think that we need to be taught about Christianity, compared with 44% who say that we should not teach Christianity. Christianity is being taught in schools in Israel as part of Second Temple period and as part of Middle Ages period in the history classes, but it's very, very, very concise. And it's described in a very problematic way. So I just wrote a paper about how Christianity is described in some textbook, and there's a book that's going to be published about that as well. Sometimes it's not that they bring incorrect information, it's just the way it's presented, the way to present Christianity is a bit problematic. But 44% that it should not be taught. And only 37% think that New Testament should be taught, comparing to 59% who think it should not be taught. So there's a difference between people who think that Christianity should be taught in schools and people who think that New Testament should be taught in school, not as religious class, but of course as history class, as part of history or world religion. So people prefer that many people prefer that Christianity and the New Testament will not be taught in school. And that's because of the history and because of the theology and because it's a threat. I mean, although we live in Israel and we're the majority and we go to Jewish school and celebrate Jewish holidays and the Jewish calendar is the official calendar of the state, but still this fear of, missionarism, of, am I gonna influence someone is still there. That's why people are afraid to learn about Christianity. And that's part of my experience teaching Christianity to Israeli Jews in different contexts. The people are worried. I mean, they ask, so are you a Christian? I said, no, I'm Jewish. I never changed my faith because I learned Christianity and I teach Christianity. I do it because it's interesting. But this fear that if you learn Christianity, you will convert. Or if you enter a church, you will be so impressed and you will be converted. You would think that in Israel, this fear would be reduced. So as you can see, it's not. But we're not the only ones who have theological problem when we talk about Jewish-Christian relations, because also the Christians have challenges. And Christians have challenges, theological challenges, facing Jews here in Israel from two aspects. First of all, they have a problem with the Bible. The Old Testament, the text we share, is difficult. It talks about God. It talks about the chosen people. It talks about the promised land. Now, when it was a theoretical concept, they could read the Bible easily. But now they have a challenge because they have to read the Bible, the same text, the same verses from the Bible that talks about the people of God, that talks about the promised land. And the people of God, the chosen people, are the Israelis. And I mean the Jews, but for them it's the Israelis. And the promised land is their land. It's their cities, their ancestors' land. And now they have to read the Bible and find a way to deal with their Bible because it's their holy scripture. And this holy scripture talks about other people and talks about the enemy as the chosen people. And this is very challenging. How do you read the Bible now? What about Jesus being a Jew? This is something obvious. I mean, you open the New Testament, Jesus was a Jew. It's clear from the text. His mother was Jewish, the disciples were Jews. But now the Jews are the soldiers. The Jews are the state of Israel. The Jews are the state that now want to annex your land to their country. How do you deal with that? This is a problem, by the way, that Muslims don't have. But for a Christian to look at his own God and say, well, this, my God, is actually a member of these people. This is quite a challenge. And that's why you hear, you see how religion and politics are mixed with this horrible caricature, seeing the Holy Family trying to get to Bethlehem, but they stopped by the soldiers, or by all kind of statements made by Palestinians that Jesus was a Palestinian. Now, it doesn't matter if it's correct or not, if there was a Palestinian province or not in that time, but for the Christians here, to admit that Jesus was a Jew is a painful thing. It's something they have to deal with. It's not an easy thing to say as it is for American Christian to admit that Jesus was a Jew. He was a member of the enemy group. He was Jew just like the soldier in the checkpoint. So this is a great challenge for them. It's a theological challenge for them. There's nothing to do with us, but it's something that they have to deal with. And it brings us to the next challenge, and that's the conflict. You cannot really talk about theology here without talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's everywhere. You don't meet a Christian, you meet a Palestinian Christian from Palestine, Palestinian Christian from Israel, but you meet a Palestinian Christian. And when a Palestinian Christian meets a Jew, it's not a Jew, it's an Israeli Jew. So the conflict is always there. And it's really hard to put the conflict aside and say, well, let's not talk about the conflict that divides us. Let's talk about things that connect us as religious people. It doesn't work like that. The conflict is very much present in our life. And even when we have encounter with Christians from other countries, when I meet American Christians who come here, they don't relate to me just as a Jew. They relate to me as an Israeli Jew. So their opinion and their conversation with me will be connected to their political opinion and the way they perceive the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So the Israeli-Palestinian conflict overshadows every relationship we will try to create here between Christians and Jews. And we also have a problem of the language. I'll go back to the challenges to conclude them and then continue to the achievements. We also have a problem with language. We don't speak the same language. If American Jews and Christian Jews want to have a dialogue together, it's great because they both speak English. But here, Jews speak Hebrew, Christians speak Arabic. If you want to speak Arabic, the Jews will not understand. If you want to speak Hebrew, the Arab don't have usually good enough Hebrew to talk about such sensitive things. The terminology usually is lacking for talking about religion and faith. And if we speak English, both of us will not be able to speak our mother tongues. And when we talk about such sensitive things, you want to be very precise, very accurate, and use your mother tongue. So we don't use our mother tongue, and or use interpretation or translation, which is awful because translation is interpretation. So if someone has to translate you, you don't know what he actually said, how he translated you. So we also have a problem, technical problem of what language should we talk when we get together. So just to conclude, the challenges that are unique to Israel are the question of who is the minority and who is the majority, the past relation that overshadowed the relationship here, the theological question we have only with Christians, but we don't have with Muslims here, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that overshadowed every discussion we have here, and the question of language. Now, I don't want to conclude in such a pessimistic atmosphere, so I would like to talk about achievements. And there are a couple of things that are being done by organizations like the Rossing Center and other interfaith organizations in Israel. One of the main things we do, and that's mainly my work, is increasing knowledge. Through knowledge, you can build bridges, you can build understanding. So even before you get to the second stage of creating encounters and meeting the other and having a dialogue, you first have to learn about the other. And that's why we go to different pre-military program, post-military program in the IDF, in colleges for teachers, in public adult education programs, in official governmental ministries. We work with them to increase the knowledge. If you know, you are not afraid, you would be more open to meet. So increasing knowledge, creating different opportunities to meet. I just want to say a word about this group. This was a group of students to be in a rabbinical school, Orthodox, very Orthodox rabbinical, but a bit liberal compared to other Orthodox training for rabbis. So these young people, they're going to be trained as rabbis, Orthodox rabbis in Israel, and they wanted to have some encounter with Christianity, so they invited me to talk a little bit about Christianity, give them some lessons about Christianity, and then they wanted to meet Christians. So I took them to the old city, and we wanted to arrange a meeting with this young Franciscan who live in Israel for 10 years already, speak fluent Hebrew, and have very good relationship with many Jews, just to find a room where we can meet in the monastery. They wanted to have a room which is not a church, and it doesn't have any cross. And he was spending 2 days in the whole monastery to look for a room where there's no cross, where they could get together and sit together and have a conversation. We literally sat in the office of the bishop because that was the only room we could find where there was no cross. But it happened. This meeting happened, and these new rabbis, maybe the new generation of Orthodox rabbis, would be more open to encounter with other religions. So these are other encounters with the Coptic bishop, with tour guides. And these are lectures. This is a Benedictine abbot with, you see in the audience, Orthodox Jews in the Bar-Ilan University. We also have encounter programs to bring young people together, to get together and to learn about each other. So these are kids from Arab, Christian, and Muslim schools and Jewish schools. They spend some time together. They spend 5 days together with each other in each other's schools. And these are their teachers. Traveling abroad together and visiting churches, mosques, and synagogues together. And then the other way of working is by producing documents. The Christian, especially Protestant and Catholic, produced many documents in the West about their relationship with Jews. In the Jewish side, especially in Israel, we don't have so many documents produced by rabbis. And one of the most important one, I think, that was published in Israel by Israeli Orthodox rabbi was in 2015, to do the will of our Father in heaven toward partnership between Jews and Christians, and it's mainly Catholic. And maybe it's not the ultimate document, and maybe I would phrase things differently, but it's a first step from Orthodox rabbis in Israel to say, well, we are open to build relationship with Christians. So there are a lot of things that are being done, but still there's a long way to go. And part of our experience is that there's a need for openness. There's a need to increase knowledge in order to be able to bring people together and to hear each other, and then to build the bridges between the Christian and the Jews. And to remember that it's very, very different from the experience of Jews and Christians in other places around the world. It's a new challenge. It's a new reality. It's the first time in the history, and the only place in the world we have majority of Jews and minority of Christians. It's a great burden, and it's a great responsibility to be the majority. I say that as a Saba who was born in Israel. But I think if we would lose these minorities, and especially the Christian minority in Israel, we would lose a very important minority that has a lot to contribute to the society. And it should be our responsibility to make sure that they would be here and they would feel comfortable enough to stay here and to have positive and good relationship with the community, with the wider community, with the Jewish community. Now I had a problem with the chat, so now I can see the question that I was asked, and then you can also ask other question. Armenians, yeah, Armenians are part of this 20. Where the Armenians fit in? So Armenians, they're part of the couple of groups of Armenians. The Armenians are part of the non-Arab speaking Christians who are citizens of Israel. There are about 2,000 Armenians, but there are also a few hundreds of Armenians who came from Armenia after the 1990s, when Armenia got its independence, and they usually registered with no religion. They came because they had some Jewish connection, they immigrated to Israel, so they would be in the other new Israeli Christians who are registered with no religion, but practically they go to the Armenian church. It's a good question. I mean, all this definition of why is nationality the religion, and it's a very difficult and problematic definition. I mean, the reason why they added Le'om, nationality, to the registration in Israel is because of Jews, because Judaism is not a religion. So you cannot just register someone as having a Jewish religion, because Judaism is not religion, it's also nationality. So it's not citizenship. So we differentiate between citizenship, nationality, and religion. Judaism is religion and nationality, but Arab is not a religion. It's not exactly nationality, but it could be defined as nationality. And then if someone comes from Russia, for example, and he's not Jewish, and he would be registered with Russian nationality and no religion, although he's an Israeli citizen and has nothing to do with Russia anymore. So it's a quite complicated situation, but that's because they didn't want to define Judaism only as a religion. It's also a nationality. Sorry if sometimes, because I teach Christianity, I apologize that I said sometimes Old Testament instead of Hebrew Bible or Tanakh. So apologies for that. Do Israeli Christians disagree with evangelical Christians who feel that it's natural for Jews to return to Israel and fulfill of Christian? So the whole attitude toward evangelical Christianity is very complicated, because there's not really a dialogue between evangelical Jews and evangelical Christians and Israeli Jews. Evangelical Christians support Israel, supports settlements, support the government, but there's no really dialogue about the faith, because they read the Bible and they're not really open to see how Israelis read it, and Israeli Jews read the Bible, the Tanakh. So there's no really dialogue about the theology. Everyone talks about the Old Testament and the Tanakh, but they don't really communicate on that. They communicate about the political situation. In Israel, there's a big dispute about it. Some Jews said, well, they love us, they support us, let's enjoy it. And others, and others think that we should not take money from them and we should not take their support because it's all part of this eschatological understanding or reading of the scripture, and how Christians see that. So this is a very problematic issue, because for the Christians here, the evangelical Christians, the evangelical Zionist Christians, they're brother and sister in faith, but they support the enemy. I mean, you can use this terminology. And there's a document that was published in 2009. It's called Kairos Palestine. It's a time to act. And it's a document targeting Christians around the world and talking about the fact that as Christians around the world, they're supposed to support the Christians here and not to support Israel. The Christians here have a great problem with other Christians that instead of being loyal to their brother and sister in faith, supporting Israel, supporting settlements, supporting the annexation, supporting the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital, supporting moving the embassy, the American embassy to Jerusalem. So yes, it's an issue. It's a problem, and they're trying to do advocacy to create awareness to the difficulty they have with the evangelical Christians and Zionist Christians. How did I end up doing that? So I grew up in an modern Orthodox family. I knew nothing about Christianity. And like any other Israeli, I didn't learn anything in school. And I went to university to study history. And I had to take a course in Introduction to Christianity, because you cannot really learn European history without knowing anything about Christianity. Really nothing. So that was the first time I learned Christianity. And it was like a puzzle that suddenly all the pieces came together and created a picture, because I realized how Christianity is relevant to my life as an Israeli Jew. I started to understand American television and literature and art and music and politics. I mean, can you really understand the Western culture without knowing anything about Christianity? It's so Christian. Can you really understand what's going on, again, in the US now? with the president, with the decisions he makes, with his support in Israel. It's connected to his voters, to his supporter, and their connection to Israel is based on their reading of the scripture. So if you don't understand that, you don't understand their support. If you don't understand Christianity, you don't understand Judaism, because Judaism did not develop in a vacuum. It developed in dialogue and conflict with Christianity. So if you want to understand yourself, you have to know the other. And that's what I realized. It was kind of like learning a new language, and suddenly you were able to read the signs. So that's the feeling I had. And therefore I stayed and continued my studies, and I graduated from Hebrew and Comparative Religions. And then I realized that there are Christians here, and there's so many things happening here. And when you will come to Israel in the trip, and I will take you to around the Christian Quarter, you will see how fascinating it is. Every time I go there, I learn something new. I meet new people. I see their experience, and I realized that it helped me to come back to my own faith and connect back to my own religion. Because when you meet other religions and other cultures, you actually ask more questions about your own faith and own culture. And then you have to answer that. So it helps it helped me to reconnect to my own tradition and my own culture. And I ended up sharing that with other Israelis, and that's the experience they have. I just love it when they kind of say, wow, how come I didn't think about it? It's so interesting. It's really connecting the dots. So that's why I started, and that's why I ended up doing that. Yeah, no, so I'm not familiar with, I was asking about the book, Jewish New Testament. I haven't read it. But I know there are a lot of writings. I have to admit that I'm more influenced by what's happening here and working with the local communities here. So when I'm talking about Christians here, even the Arab Christians, it's not necessarily Catholic or Protestants. There's diversity here. You have Armenian, and you have Syriac, and you have Copts, and you have Ethiopians, and the Greek Orthodox Church, and that different part of the Greek Orthodox Church. So my experience with Christians is quite different than American experience with Christianity. It's not necessarily through the text, I would say, or through the theology. It's more through the daily life, the culture, some anthropology, sociology. So it's not necessarily the textual. I will not necessarily sit with a Coptic Christian and read the text together, but I would be very interested to hear about the liturgy and about the rituals and about the processions and about the challenges of the community and how do they define their identity and the challenges of being a minority in Israel. So that would be more of my concern than just the text.
Hana?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask a question. It's 1:30, so I want to wrap it up. So one question before we go. Could you just say a little bit about the tours that you do in Jerusalem, of Christian Jerusalem, and what do people see and what do they hear?
Okay, so what we usually do in the tour is that we go through the Christian Quarter, and usually when you come to Israel in a group in the synagogue, you usually go to the Jewish Quarter and the Western Wall, but it's kind of going into the Old City and turning right. And I usually go to the Old City and turn left to the Christian Quarter, and we walk through the small alleys of the Christian Quarter, and we see the diversity within Christianity. So we see the different churches, the Orthodox, the Copt, the Syriac, and we see the different people from the different churches. And in the traditional churches, they also have the habits. So they have different kind of habits. A lot of men with long dresses and long beards and long hair. And we will talk about the differences between them and about, as I said, challenges of maintaining the community as a minority and maintaining the identity as a Christians in the state, and the tensions between leadership and lay people, and the tension between different communities, and when do they work together and when do they collaborate. For example, now during the coronavirus period, Corona time as we call it, they had to work a lot together. How do they do that? Catholic with Orthodox, with Armenian. So how does it work together? And I think one of the places that kind of amplified all, and you can experience it even without knowing much, is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is not just a place, the holy space to most of Christians in the world, where Jesus was crucified, buried, and resurrected according to the Christian tradition, but it's also a church that hosts 5 different denominations, sharing the place in a very unique situation that is maintained since the 19th century. So that's what I usually do in my Christian tours.
Amazing. So in case anyone doesn't know, there is an CSP Israel trip coming up in 2021. And so if you're interested in that, you can sign up. You can contact Ari. That's October of 2021. And this has been an amazing program. Hana, thank you so much for everything. It was really wonderful.
I will put again in the chat, I'll put again my email. So if someone want to have, there are more questions here and I haven't had the time to answer. So I'll add my email. So if you want to email me questions, I'll be happy to answer. So it's now, right. So it's in the chat now. So if you want to have another second to write it down, you're welcome to do that. And it's in the beginning of the presentation. So if you go back to the recording, it's there. You're welcome to contact with other questions.
Perfect.
I'll be happy to answer.
Hana, thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us.
Good.
See you soon.
Have a
Have
nice day.
Thursday.